Tonight, we put a spotlight on Ghana's democracy and subject it to the litmus test by asking the hard and uncomfortable questions about whether or not it is fit for purpose after this break. You're welcome back. My name is Raymond Alqua. And now, we know that according to Greek philosopher Socrates, an unexamined life is not worth living. It's for this reason that today we will seek to review the nation's democracy after more than 30 years of constitutional rule in the Fourth Republic. Joining me via Zoom for this all-important conversation is Emerita Professor Techiwa Menu, is a former director of the Social Development Policy Division of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. She has also been a professor at the University of Ghana's Institute of African Studies, where she served as director of that particular institute anyway. And more importantly, she is a fellow of the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences, that prestigious institution, of course. And we'll also be joining this conversation another distinguished personality by all standards and qualifications, that is political and governance expert, Dr. Emmanuel Akwete. He is the executive director of the Institute for Democratic Governance. Distinguished lady and gentlemen, you're welcome to our front.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, let me start with you, Professor Techiwa Menu. I brought up this conversation because at some point in the history of every country, they take a stock, they review, and ask themselves the very, very difficult question of whether or not their governance is yielding the needed results and their system of governance is actually operating the way it's supposed to operate. There's a question, though, that my colleagues asked me that was quite baffling. Maybe you would be the right person to ask the question. What kind of democracy are we practicing, if we are practicing democracy at all?
Thank you very much, Raymond. Good evening to you and to your viewers, and good evening, Emmanuel. So thank you for having me on your program and trying to put me on the hot seat. What kind of democracy are we practicing? Is it fit for purpose? Raymond, I believe that this country fashioned the constitution for itself. Well, it has fashioned several constitutions, but in recent memory, the Fourth Republican Constitution that came into force in 1993 has been operative law. And I would say that it has worked fairly well. We had lived under years of unconstitutional rule of military governments, and desirous of fashioning ourselves or ushering ourselves into an era of constitutionalism, along with several other countries. If you remember the 1990s, the late 1980s, early 1990s, was the time of the national conferences, especially around West Africa, where several countries returned to democratic rule after decades of military rule. Our constitution was not imposed on us. We had a constituent assembly drawn up of various groups and some eminent persons who prepared a draft constitution that was debated. I don't believe that there is a perfect constitution anywhere in the world. And I believe that our constitution had important provisions for safeguarding the basic rights of the citizenry, for ensuring separation of powers, and the rule of law, and ensuring that several institutions were set up and they worked fairly. I think that if our constitution has not worked well, it is not the fault of so much about the constitution as about the people and the institutions that have been implementing them. So yesterday I was in a forum and somebody made this, they quoted a very profound remark that democracy needs Democrats. You can't just decide that you want democratic rule or democratic governance when you don't have people who either believe in it or work to ensure adherence to it. So perhaps we need to turn the question round and ask ourselves whether we do have enough Democrats and whether the institutions that we set up has functioned as it should. I am aware, of course, that we set up a Constitutional Review Committee, that it came up with several recommendations, and that they have largely not been implemented. There is also a concern over the excessive power of the executive and the ways in which there is not enough of a counterbalance from the other, organs of state, whether it's especially Parliament. But we should not throw away the baby with the bathwater. And I believe that, notwithstanding several comments in our public sphere in recent times, that we do have a system, and which is very much the envy of several of our neighbors, not only in our sub-region, but further afield in Africa. And I think that we need to be measured when we come to look at our constitution and the institutions that we have set up, and that, as I say, we don't throw away the baby with the bathwater, or allow some developments to make us lose faith in the essential provisions that we have made ourselves. And I think that we need to remember that the Constitution was not imposed on us, and the system that we chose was freely chosen.
Quite a comprehensive introductory remark there. I'm sure we will explore some of the points you raised and some of the issues you actually brought on board here. But if I can switch to Dr. Akwete, I want us to quickly let the people who are supposed to be part of this system of governance understand exactly what dividends did we have in mind when we fashioned for ourselves this kind of democracy, and whether or not we are anywhere near achieving the goals of this democracy.
Thank you very much. First of all, you ought to have informed me that Prof is going to be on this program, because I think she deserves all the space. And since you didn't do that, I am going to repeat some of the answers. So we are sharing it. And I think if you ask the question, what kind of democracy we have, do we deserve it, has it served us well? This year, exactly in 2 months, would be the 30th anniversary of the Fourth Republic as a multi-party constitutional democracy. It's a feat we struggled to achieve from independence. And you would know that from 1964, and even much earlier when the struggle began, whether we want to be a multi-party democracy or a one-party state, it led to many consequences. Multi-party democracy never had the space. After 1996, 64, one-party state. Then in 1996, NLC came on board. Then the multi-party arrangement with the Progress Party, also was very short-lived. We had NLC, SMC, then the Third Republic came. Also 27 months it was out. Then we had the long period of PNDC rule, 10 years. And out of that, we now had this constitution, the Fourth Republican Constitution, as a multi-party constitutional democracy. The fact that we've been able to manage it, to handle it, to steer it, to solve its problems, shows great success. Shows that we made a decision that we prefer to have the system than the authoritarian alternatives of a military government, which you get through a coup, and also of a one-party state. Now, I think democracy is a construction. You see problems, you fix it. New problems emerge, you fix them. But having 30 years of peace and stability. Tough elections. I don't know which other country has elections as tough, presidential and parliamentary. And we found ways of managing that. We've gained recognition as beacon of democracy in West Africa, but we lead even as one of the strongest multi-party constitutional democracies in Africa. Electoral commissions in Africa were built, the Electoral Commission played crucial roles in building electoral commissions throughout Africa. The IPACs, if you hear them, and you might even know about the peace pacts and civil society election rooms and so on. We've innovated a lot. When we adopted we went biometric. Then Nigeria was the first. But when Nigeria came and saw the system, the former Professor Atahiru, he commended what Ghana had done and said the Nigerians could even go far, the kind of technology they brought on board. And these are very expensive things. And we know we've upgraded it and so on. So our commitment to developing our democracy is not one thing that once we move from PNDC to the Fourth Republic, everything has been fixed. It was actually the start of the experiment and the start of trying to shape a democracy that would also help us to move on delivering the development dividends that many majority of people in Ghana, in this case the youth, are also looking for.
Okay.
So it has worked well, but changes. And I think in this period of 30 years, we've seen significant progress too. For instance, today we can talk about per capita income being around 2,000. Poverty has been reduced, is below half. It used to be 50-something. And our country is open now, infrastructure development and all that. And people have high aspirations. But what is consistent is that the mandate to determine who governs belongs to the people, and they've held strongly onto it. It is for us now to see how what we have achieved can be consolidated where there is strength, and also address the weaknesses. And where we are not doing well, I think I see three areas that require attention. I think over the 30 years of running this democracy, our state, the institutions of state, have been weakened considerably, to the extent that sometimes you have the sense that the two dominant parties are trying to replace the state. And it hasn't worked. They politicize the civil service, the public services, and so on and so forth. And they decide everything and all that. And people, what you see is a reaction of that. Because people want to see a stronger police, a court that is independent, that administers justice, and everybody says, hey, in spite of the human limitations that we have in all situations of politics and development. You also know that accountability is extremely bad. And again, if you want to see the success and weaknesses of our democracy, I don't think it's whether it is liberal or multi-party that matters. It's rather we should look at it in terms of how the parties that had dominated the Fourth Republic in the last 30 years have behaved and preserved the institutions of state. I was very happy when I read yesterday in the graphic politics session an aspiring MPP candidate for the chairmanship of MPP, Mr. Agosio Seje, when he was asked about what inspires him to do this, he said, to go for the post, he says he wants to put nation building center of his leadership. He thinks parties must build the nation. And it's a powerful message he has sent. Our divisions have been exploited and all that. But at the end of the day, we all really think that we can fix the democracy we have. That's why constitutional reviews have been done. That's why proposals are coming for reforming local government. That is why many people are thinking of other options, except that those calling for coup cannot be the alternative to this, because they are two contradictory systems. You know, they don't coexist, and they have different principles underlying them. But the last point I want to make is that in the 30 years that we've lived under this democracy, our civil rights and political liberties have grown. We are asking for more. We speak freely. We do almost everything we can in the public space. And sometimes we wonder whether public spaces shouldn't be regulated. We thought NCCE had been set up because democracy is a construction. The values that it espouses are also taught and shaped. But our NCCE has never worked to cultivate the democratic culture and the democratic values that we require. And that has been a problem. And we now have gotten to a stage where even the executive arm of government, which was to deliver the development dividends and ensure the rule of law impartially and fairly, has also not been able to do that because it is not, that organ is not fully democratic. Okay, it is partially democratic, apart from electing the president and the president governing with a majority of his cabinet ministers from parliament who are also elected. Whichever party, okay, wins the presidency and the majority has great total monopoly over the executive arm of government. And we have excluded opposition parties from governing, from playing a role in the executive government of state. Whether you are big as NDC in opposition or MPP in opposition at one time, you have no role to play in the executive arm of government. And that is where the hybridity of the system needs to be reformed. Otherwise, the foundations are strong, and I think it is time to review and to implement some of the reforms that have been proposed and are on the table, and see how the gaps can be closed and the weaknesses can be addressed, so that the next 30 years will be a foundation on which we can bring about development, as Chapter 6 of the Constitution directs that we do.
Now, those are interesting suggestions and issues you point out there. I am going to the Afrobarometer 2020 report. There are important questions that deals with the issue of how much of a democracy Ghana is today. So if you indulge me, that question when it was asked, in fact, only 3% said Ghana is not a democracy. almost 67% of the people who responded in this case said Ghana is a democracy with either major problems, that's 25%, and also with minor problems, which is 43%. So altogether, we're talking about 67 or so of the grouping that responded, saying that yes, Ghana is a democracy, but either has minor or major problems. Now, if I switch to Pastor Techiwa Menu, does it tell you the way the ordinary people who were surveyed here and the people who were part of this survey in the Afrobarometer perceive the democracy in the Republic of Ghana? Is it the same reflection you come to it? And which specific minor and major problems do you identify yourself?
Thank you, Raymond. So, Emmanuel, I did not know you were here either. And yesterday I was quoting you at another forum where I was at, and I want to remind you of a statement because it goes to part of what you said. I remember a long time ago, you talking about being a naive student in Sweden soon after you had arrived and there had been an election, and you saw the same people still holding their positions, and you asked, but there has been an election, and they said yes. So why is this person still in the position? And it's like, well, he's Swedish, isn't he? You know, so this winner takes all mentality, where here, once somebody is elected to power, everybody else must leave so that their people can come in. This is one of the problems that Raymond, perhaps if people had been queried more, they would speak to. But you see, I want to preface this issue that you have raised. and put it in a more global context. Yesterday, I was speaking at a breakfast meeting on a similar topic about recent coups in West Africa and how safe our democracy was. And I started by looking at an index, something that I read recently about how democracy is in decline worldwide. So this is a Bertelsmann Transformation Index, which says that for the first time since 2004, more autocratic states have been recorded worldwide than democratic states. So in a survey of 137 developing and transition countries, only 67 were still considered democracies, and the number of autocracies had increased to 70. And so how do you measure this? So what the index was saying was that around the world, there are fewer free and fair elections, less freedom of opinion and assembly, and increasing erosion of the separation of powers. These are issues that we are familiar with. But and what are the main drivers of these autocracies? They found political and economic elites who want to protect their clientelist and corrupt systems, the waves of populism, and the growing repression in the face of COVID-19. You are asking whether the sentiments that ordinary people express are different, because you seem to think that we are speaking a different language. I don't think so. You know, in Ghana, democracy, in chief, for instance, democracy is defined or interpreted as kebinamin kebiabai. You speak and let me speak. So this freedom of expression, this freedom of assembly, etc. And in this survey, Ghana was ranked quite highly. Ghana came out in the status index. Ghana was 24 out of 137 countries. And it's in terms of democracy in consolidation, Ghana scored 8 out of 10 and was 17 out of 137. When it came to good governance, Ghana scored 19 out of 137. What is interesting is when it came to economic transformation, the dividends, some of the tangible dividends of democracy, where Ghana scored 64 out of 137. And the index said that if it was to summarize in one sentence what the priority in Ghana should be, it was that Ghana needed to address economic disparities, this widening inequality that is happening in our society. And when you talk to people, sometimes people kind of, you know, they wrap up things. They will wrap up the economic, etc. We've been talking about the dividends of democracy. Democracy must deliver. Democracy is not just about the ideas in anybody's head. There must be some tangible benefits. And we must ask ourselves, what can democracy deliver? So democracy here is delivering this freedom. When you are arrested, you have the right to be taken to court within a certain period, the right to representation, speech, etc. It may not always happen, but it is an aspiration, and more people have recourse to lawyers, etc. to do that. I think that where we fail, it's when it comes to this representation. CDD recently did a survey that brought out the costs of electoral office, which is really stitching up the political system, so that if you do not have a godfather, if you cannot afford the cost of running for office, you are really out. And increasingly, it means that most people, it means women, it means younger people are out of that political goal. You know, it's interesting, when we look at our political parties today, they have become just electoral machines. They are just there to organize to win elections. And after that, yes, when elections are coming, you see the fights gearing up again. But in between elections, you do not see much activity. So political parties, at least in Ghana, have not become schools for democracy. You know, Emmanuel talked about the NCCE. Yes, but in addition to the NCCE, other civil society organizations, after all, what are political parties? They are civil society organizations. They are people of like mind, etc. They are supposed also to educate, because as he said, democracy is a construction. You don't get it fully made and given to you. And in a democracy, what makes it so difficult is that there is a diversity of views and opinions. In an authoritarian system, somebody just mandates that this is what must be done, whether you like it or not. That is what happens. In a democracy, there is more space, you know. And let's not forget that we're also living in a world almost of perpetual crisis. So if it's not a financial crisis, it may be a public health crisis, etc. Now, there is all this uncertainty, even over Ukraine and what is happening. So all of those things demand new answers, a lot of creativity, and it is not happening. The fact that it is not happening, or that we don't have ready-made answers, does not mean that it's a failure. It just means that we have to think some more and be more creative.
Prof,
you know?
How do you respond to that gentleman who just left University of Ghana with the hope that you will find a good job to do, and after 5 years of having university education, he's still without a job? Seeing an economy,
yes, I know that.
Seeing an economy of this sort.
These are the challenges. We have a rift between our younger generations and the older generations, especially the political elites. We have in our sub-region in West Africa, the median age of our young population is 18.1 years. And then we have a political elite which is about 66 years, you know. So when there are no jobs, it reflects. And the problem is that there has been little economic transformation in our country. There has been little. The state is still the guarantor of jobs. We talk a lot about the private sector, but most of the jobs are not being generated there. So that is the problem. So we've got...
forgive me, but the question is that who caused them? To the young person, it is the system that he was born into that is guaranteeing he's unemployed today and still suffering. So perhaps...
but that is the populism we're talking about. We are aware. These are the structural problems that we have not solved, that we must solve. It has been going on for a long time. We have an Unemployed Graduates Association. So these are part of the challenges, you know, a youth that is not as hopeful as, let's say, the youth in my generation or in the generation before and just after. Those are some of the challenges that we have. And these are the democratic deficits that we must deal with. And I'm saying that a lot has to do in the slow economic transformation. We keep exporting our jobs. We keep exporting. It's still the cocoa export economy. We have not diversified enough. We are also in a digital world, and yet most of our stuff, you know, it's not about opening digitization projects. We still have children sitting on stones, chalk, and this thing in the blackboard. So we have not transformed our systems enough. But I believe that if we did, we could create many more jobs. You know, so we often see job creation as something that occurs outside of our major sectors, or something that is brought somewhere. A Ministry of Employment does not create jobs. A Ministry of Employment largely regulates labor relations, etc. Job creation should be a component of everything that we do. And we must ask, whether it is a new investment or whatever, how many jobs will be created through that? I don't believe that every university graduate must create jobs for themselves. No, but we must train our students to be adaptable to the new challenges in our economy and globally. And perhaps we are not doing enough of that. So I think that we need to look at it at different segments. You know, you cannot just say that because a government has failed just because people are not getting jobs when they leave universities. Maybe is it a function of the type of education that they are getting? Is it because the economy is not dynamic enough, etc.? We have to ask these kinds of questions. Otherwise, we get into the populist mode where out of frustration, people start, thinking of non-alternatives as an alternative.
I want to explore this point with you. Would it be out of range for this young person I'm talking about? Of course, he's also studied political science. He understands, at least from the kind of people that have taught him, what democracy really is and the dividends he is supposed to be getting out of that and what's supposed to be happening. He believes that after 3 decades, a lot of the economic transformation has not happened. You seem to suggest the same thing. His entire view of it is that democracy has been hijacked by a few for their good and for their promotion and their development alone. Is it wrong to think and say that this is not a functioning democracy and it needs to be worked on immediately?
Oh, I don't disagree with him. I don't disagree with him. On the other hand, you would need to show empirically that autocratic governments created more jobs, gave more opportunity. In fact, it could be the argument that some of those things were exacerbated by these autocratic governments.
There's a recent fanciful idea about Rwanda, for example, that Rwanda, with all of its not so pronounced democratic credentials, is delivering the goals that the people want in the state.
Therefore,
is that not an option on the table for the people of this republic?
So we should become, is it your proposal then that we should become like Rwanda?
I have no such proposal. I'm just saying that
certainly we can increase our efficiencies. And I go back to the question of economic transformation and dynamization of our economy. I don't disagree. We should, and Akwete was talking about the unaccountabilities, we know about the waste in our system, all of those kinds of things. Certainly, we should look at all of these kinds of factors, but I think that I still prefer democracy. I have lived in a few authoritarian countries, I assure you, including in Ghana under different regimes, and I prefer an imperfect democracy. But I am not sanguine. I'm not suggesting that all is well, we should not do anything. And I told you that the priority in Ghana is about addressing these economic disparities, about economic transformation in Ghana today. That means plugging the holes. That means re-examining some of our hallowed truths, That means really going back to the drawing board and looking at some of the models that we have been operating and whether they are efficacious enough. There are so many components of it. It's not just about tax compliance and tax collection, but it's also about how taxes are used. It's about accountabilities. It's about procurement. It's about this dependence, that we have. We import so much that we have so little fiscal space. And all the projects, I have seen a very ambitious infrastructure investment plan that, if it was developed, would generate so much jobs. But where is the money for it? We are not even looking at it. So we are just kind of limping from year to year, trying to get out of it. That is not a sustainable model. And in this index, the 2 lowest scores for Ghana was at the socioeconomic level and on sustainability. So we don't have the fiscal sustainability, we don't have the economic sustainability. This is what is slowing down the creation of jobs and fueling the despair of young people.
And I am grateful to you. I'll be coming back to you again on these questions, but let me go to Professor Akwete on this one. Doc, the conversation has tilted to the point where there's the demand for the dividends to be put on the table, for it to be properly evaluated, for us to be able to understand whether or not this democracy we are practicing is yielding the needed economic transformation that is supposed to be brought into the lives of especially the young people who sometimes question it. Are these legitimate inquiries?
They are, and I think what they do most importantly is to challenge us to undertake reforms that would focus more on delivering the development dividend. You need a sustained high growth rate over a period of time. If you take China, it took them 30 years to bring about the transformation that has now put them where they are in the world. Hard work, discipline, and so on. But one of the things that many people do not know is that China's ability to deliver its economic and social policies rested on a very efficient bureaucracy. Civil servants are not members of the Communist Party. And China prioritizes, the best. The engineers, in fact, it said that with the exception of the current President Xi, most of China's presidents and prime ministers were engineers. Mm-hmm. So they do not play with their civil service, their public services. And if you look at countries like Korea and others, their National Development Planning Commission and so on, civil servants, technocrats, engineers, the various disciplines, they deliver development, but they have to be protected. They're able to design things, they're able to envision things, and they do it for everybody. They build nations and so on. We chose not to do that. You mentioned Rwanda. Rwanda reminds, if you've been to Rwanda a couple of times and you've read about what happened in Ghana between 57 and let's say 64, mm-hmm. It reminds you of that period in Ghana.
Yeah.
Schools were being built, hospitals, factories, this and that. And there's a visionary leader and he's dominant and he's able to move people and so on and so forth. That is Rwanda today and after the catastrophe that occurred there.
Yeah.
In future, whether it will be sustained after the strong man and the visionary leader leaves is another matter. We have gone through various experiences, mm-hmm. but we are wiser today because I think that there have been some very significant developments that should give us hope that the next 30 years of democracy, 30 years is considered to be a period for a new generation to emerge.
Yeah.
It's called the generational span.
Yeah.
The next 30 years, on the foundations of the democracy we built, all of them are going to move into greater focus on development. But we need to change and reform the system, especially the parties, the local government, and so on. Just look at this. NDC, before it left office, said it's now pursuing 40 years long-term development plan. No long-term development plan has successfully or even been sustained in Ghana. After Nkrumah, the 7-year plan was thrown away. We went around in the wilderness doing a lot of IMF, World Bank formulas and policies and so on, usually medium terms. And it couldn't transform our economy or bring us the jobs we need because they had to streamline how we manage the economy and so on. But in 1995, the long-term development plan came up again. And so you had Vision 2020. We implemented Vision 2020 for about 4 years and then dumped it on political reasons, for political causes. Just that. We've never been able, the political leaders of today, the political elites, especially the two parties, did not want to continue each other's project. Yet it was taxpayers' money and they took loans and they couldn't pay back and all that. And that has messed us up in a big time. And then when you continue, you now see that under these two parties, we got to a stage where now, when you come to public office, it's more about amassing wealth. And that also means taking state money, but also the financiers of elections and so on also had their priorities: procure, inflate, construction, and so on. So it wasn't so much about the systematic way of saying we are doing something to transform the economy. The kind of jobs we create will not only be digital, but also intensive labor over the years would evolve into some situation. And we want to cut down on the number of unemployed people. Some of these ideas went into this whole situation, but implementation capacity has broken down since Nkrumah's time. It's a paradox. Successful period, we are told that we did well in developing, growing the economy and developing industry, creating jobs and so on. Many people refer to Kutwe Champon's time.
Yeah.
And yes, 1972. And then things went bad. But what they tell you is that he governed with a competent civil service. Professional institutions were working and so on and so forth. But we broke all the institutions from one coup to one revolution to whatever. So the present task is how we're able to build our institutions, put them back.
Okay.
But we are not saying let people starve and not have jobs or eat because we're building institutions. It simply means that we have to undertake certain reforms. Out of the teeming millions who do not have a job, you find that there are first-class material, people with a lot of potential. Where do they go to be trained to expand the 260 plus one districts we have? Each of them need a certain quality of accountants, administrators, just name the various economists, sociologists, public service, trained public admin experts, and so on. And that we are going to open up that to the young, educated people. In fact, this is the most educated youth we have in our country compared to 1960 or 1950s and so on, in terms of their numbers alone. There's a very literate population, and they are exposed to the world. I mean, digital technology, they know what is happening in other places. So their demands are real, very informed, and yet our parties are focused on something else, probably more self-enrichment than serving society and communities, which is what most parties in Europe do. You remember at the MPP convention after 2016, when they won the election, they invited somebody from the Conservative Party. I think there was a convention at Kofodia.
Yes.
And when the man came, when he had his time to speak, he was more upset about the size of billboards and the kind of shows that were going on around the place. And how did he criticize them? He said, but where are the people? How are you going to serve them? How are you going to solve their problems? You know, when the person chairing that meeting took over the mic, he said that the man does not understand how politics works in Africa. But politics means you're going to build institutions, you're going to think of the whole, because the mandate of the state is for you to take care of everybody who is a citizen, not on the ethnic cards and not on who financed you and who left you out and so on. We've done a lot of things that are breaking the institutions that can deliver development, and we need to go to that. And I'm happy that that's why I said we've come to a point where if you look at the conversations on reforms, well, we usually tend to lead with constitution. But I think the constitutional approach also confuses many people as to the strategic place where we should target first and see how that would impact other areas and bring about rapid development, open up markets, create jobs, and put us back on the development track. And some say, oh, amend how many articles, about 1/3 of the articles, and so on. We are all talking constitution. I think that, and this is our position in IDEC, that government policies are implemented, formulated and implemented by a bureaucracy. The civil service, the public service, the NDPCs, and so on. They are state agents, they are not party agents. But now we have politicized them. People are even afraid to be more professional. So how do we push the parties back? So these competent technical people with all sorts of knowledge and expertise to take the helm. Of course, there will be mechanisms of providing political leadership, but not what we have now. And that is extremely important. But the crucial area we must look first is the executive arm of government. Some people have done that by saying that it's so powerful. I think that if we want to deliver services and we want to look at what will bring rapid relief to our people, we should look at the machinery for implementing the development policies that will create more jobs for the youth, healthcare for communities, provide water, sanitation, and so on. And it's in the local areas. And that is where I think our focus should go, because it's the delivery of the public goods that has collapsed out of the whatever is corruption, out of the monetization, and so on and so forth. But we need to go there. Would you mind to know that since 1964, political parties in opposition have been excluded, in fact, banned, prohibited from participating in local government. But that is where the development agenda, you begin to learn how to live with your community, prioritize their needs, and say, aggregate them, say, when I come to power, I'm going to do this and do that. They've been pushed out. And then the governing party then also has other priorities than solving the problems of the youth and so on. And even they are doing it, they tend to want to use people other than the civil servants. Because the civil servants now, the civil service is broken, just as the police and others. So, but we can turn these things around. And I'm happy that in the last manifesto of the two parties, both of them focused on local government, because it is the machinery for delivering the development dividends we need.
I say.
That is where every government goes. If we touch that, we are going to touch the central government. Can we now make development, not elections? Elections have excelled because these parties have become election machines. How do we turn them into development operators or machines?
Legitimate question. Forgive me, but it's a legitimate question, except that I would want to bring it home finally on this point. We have a current situation where our economy is not in the best of shapes. There's also a lot of demand on the street for a lot of public good in this country today. There's a general discussion about whether we are heading the right direction or not. Exactly how do we merge these conversations into a mode that would help us develop our democracy and get the benefits out of it now? The immediate steps to be taken, mindful of our current difficulties and the current conversations surrounding us.
Thank you very much, Raymond. I don't know that there is any conversation now which will fix problems that have been in the making for a while. And I think that some of the issues that we have been raising, the lack of fiscal space. So I agree with Akwete about local economic development, etc. But you need resources. Okay. You need resources to do that. And I like the point about parallel institutions. We like creating too many parallel institutions, which ends up paralyzing existing institutions and not allowing them to work. Raymond, in the recent few years, we've had this one district, one factory, etc. How much has been spent on one district, one factory? Do we know it? What is the dividend, if you like? This is huge potential for employment. Imagine that this had been done on a scientific, when I say scientific, in other words, you have surveyed what resources are available in particular districts. You have tried to leverage investment and capital to go to those districts. That would have really created a lot of some employment to deal with the issues that we have spoken about. It would also have channeled the skills and experiences of many of our graduates, not only from the universities, but from the technical and even JHS institutions. But we don't know. And how much money has been spent, you know? So it's important, because otherwise, we've seen everything before. New programs are inaugurated with a lot of fanfare, and then over some time, many years later, you see the signboards, and that is when you remember that once upon a time, something like that happened, you know. I would also urge that the media plays a much more constructive role in this kind of discourse by sometimes not over-sensationalizing things. Sometimes we behave as if something has just happened. These are conversations, these are concerns that have been expressed for a long period, you know. And maybe what we do need now is some kind of a national conference, some national consultations to lay out these kinds of issues. I have a problem with the local government systems that we have, the ways in which they were fashioned, and we know it. And of course, that is the stuff that IDEC works on. If we don't reform them thoroughly so that they just do not become depend on what the District Assembly Common Fund and other small funds that are leveraged, no real local economic development can occur. And if there is no local economic development, that is when you find the wholesale problems that occur. In many other countries, people really, it's not that they don't care about which government is in power, but services are delivered at that local level.
Prof, I need to push you a little bit on this point. Is there a risk of degeneration of our current status if the current status quo is maintained?
Degeneration of what
I'm
status?
saying,
I don't understand.
Is there a risk that our democracy will go from the current state to bad to worse and keep degenerating if nothing is changed?
I think we should. Democracy is made up of many parts, and we are talking about the economic part.
That's true.
Mostly, and right now the concern is about. We know that the city is in free fall. Nobody has explained to us what exactly is happening. That kind of generates a lot more panic, and people are going to hoard and all of those things. So we want to feel that somebody is in charge and they can understand the anxieties that the public is facing and speaks to them. You know, otherwise it's like there are two levels and they are parallel and they are not meeting anywhere. So certainly it's happening. The interest rates are being raised in the US. It's going to have an impact on our capital markets here. There's a war going on. For a country that is as weak as ours, when I say weak, I'm talking about the economic fundamentals, and so dependent, of course there will be some temporary disorganization. Whether we have the means to really stitch things up and go the course is another matter, you know. And I worry that we are not hearing enough either from our central bank or from the Ministry of Finance to really explain what is happening. But I think that our democracy still is strong. I think that we should stop talking in this panic mode as if by tomorrow morning the whole house is going to fall down. And there may be some.
Maybe ask this direct one. It's obvious. I get the impression from you that you disagree with the recent diagnosis of the situation by Professor Raymond Atuguba about some impending implosion.
Oh, well, I think that the main point that I understood Raymond to be talking about was also about economic management. I don't know at what point he talked about the threat of a coup, but I don't believe in that. I do not see that there is anybody is calling for a coup or wants a coup, or that more fundamentally that a coup is going to solve any of the problems that we are facing. If anything, it will worsen the situation that we are in. We've seen it before, you know, and even this recent attempt to present the Achampong government as some kind of savior for those of us who lived through it. This is not how it looked, apart from the initial 2 years of Operation Feed Yourself and Operation Feed Your Industries.
Permit me to roll over.
Institutions really started unraveling, you know. So I think that it's not that I don't disagree with Raymond in his fundamentals about the economy and the need for economic transformation, because we are not going to get the jobs that we need. We are not going to be able to dynamize the economy and our society and therefore our democracy if we persist in this handout kind of thing.
Thank you.
The Eurobond market and raising and coming back. It doesn't change the fundamental.
I am grateful to you, Prof. And Professor Techiwa Men, who is a former director of the Institute of African Studies. Unfortunately, I've run out of time. Forgive me. I think this conversation should be happening a lot more often. Many thanks to you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us on this particular conversation. This is UPfront. My name is Raymond Alkwa.